Faisal Alshawa. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, good, Elliot. For yourself, all as well. Thanks for having me on.
The pleasure is mine. I'm looking forward to diving into this discussion today. And to give a little bit of context for those who may have not come across yourself before, can you give us a little bit of an understanding of who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, my background's actually in sports and exercise science. I started off as a sports nutritionist working for the Qatar national football team. That was back in 2014. My passion was always to work in football, with athletes in general. So that's kind of what drove me to actually get into the field, but also pursue my dream of wanting to work in football. And then I started an Instagram account back in 2015. At the time, it was called Believe Nutrition. That was my first startup, and put out a lot of content with regards to how people can live a healthy lifestyle through habit and behavior change, and just inspiring people to live a healthy lifestyle and make it a part of who they are. One thing led to the other. Ended up kind of taking this from just a pure Instagram account where I was just having fun with putting out content to actually creating a business out of it. At the time, I used to create personalized meal plans for people, but also built a habit-based curriculum. So I used to take a lot of my clients through, a habit change journey where I'd help transform their habits into healthier ones, one step at a time. I used to work with individual athletes as well on the side, just because that's something that always excites me. And then, a year and a half ago, completely pivoted and digitized my nutrition and habit-based coaching into an app, and now kind of rebranded and pivoted once again into an app called Kayam, which is basically a mindful eating and habit building app to help people lose weight without dieting. So, yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. And on the note of the football side of things, you mentioned it was your dream to work in professional football. What led you to moving away from that? Of course, you had the Instagram account, but it sounds like the working in football side of things was a lifelong passion. So to leave that behind to go and jump on this business that you created off the back of creating Instagram posts is quite a big deal.
Yeah, it was actually really tough to kind of let go of that dream in the beginning, but I'm kind of accepting of the fact now. I think for me it was when you work in football, especially, it's you can make change obviously with those that you're working with, but for me I always had kind of this bigger desire to actually like transform people's lives. And with athletes you can do that, but there's when it comes to nutrition, especially in football, it was overlooked at the time and taken for granted. So not many people kind of believed in it and how it can improve their performance. Obviously impacted those who I worked with and was able to create performance change. But for me, I ended up kind of as I started to work with a handful of clients while still being full time and with the national team, and realizing the transformations I was helping people achieve. That for me is what kind of inspired to shift towards the general healthy public or population, and really work with those who really need my service and those who want to just change their lifestyle. So it was more about that greater good of trying to really make an impact. And obviously the region that I'm in, I'm currently in Dubai, but in the Middle East in general, big obesity and diabetes epidemic. So there's even a bigger goal and mission to kind of help decrease these rates as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. So that's some real bigger picture thinking right there. And it's an interesting topic you mentioned. And I speak to a lot of coaches and they have a similar story. It might not necessarily be at the level of a football national team, but more in the sense of you obviously get these performance increases, but these guys are almost already at the top of their game. So you're just adding that extra 1 to 2%, which can go a huge, huge way when it comes to elite sport. But at the same time, you're not helping someone be able to go up the stairs without being out of breath, or to be able to keep up with their kids when they're running around, or to, like you said, reverse diabetes or something along those lines, which is, you can give the same amount of time and energy, but you almost get like a 50 or to 100% bigger impact when you're working with one individual versus the next, right?
100%. I mean, you said it. You took the words out of my mouth. I mean, when it comes, to athletes in general, for the most part, yeah, you do create that 1 to 2% change, which, as you said, can be huge. Especially in like endurance sports, where if you can get someone, for example, like a triathlete, to finish even point 0.3, point 0.4 seconds, ahead of the competitor, or, better than his or her personal best. That's a huge change for them. But yeah, I mean, I've had many, successful stories in the past, and another one that you mentioned, which is reversing diabetes. When you have when you're dealing with diabetic, and then kind of work with them over several months, and then they end up doing another test, and then their blood glucose levels are where it should be, if not lower, then that's what it's all about for me at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's life-changing stuff. It really is. And why nutrition and not training? I find that most of us fitness professionals, we go down one route, or we at least have a bias towards one. We don't neglect the other, of course, but there's always one that we want to center our focus around. Why was it nutrition for you?
Funny enough, actually, so once I graduated from the UK, Loughborough University, to get my master's in sports science, the goal was always to get into strength and conditioning. I actually stuck around in the UK after that. I did an internship at Nottingham Trent University, working as a strength and conditioning intern with their scholarship athletes. So actually, I did want to take the training route, funny enough, until this opportunity at Qatar came about. And then, once I actually immersed myself in the sports nutrition world, and started to do a lot of research on it, and really realizing the impact it can have on athletes. But even just going off of the impact it had on me once I started to change the way I eat, but then understanding how nutrition plays a role in your physical, mental, emotional health, I really started to enjoy, and I really started to realize the importance of nutrition. I mean, at the end of the day, what you put into your body is what you get out of it, right? It all starts with food. So it can play a huge role in people's lives. So that's kind of what gained my interest to continue in the field. And generally, I think training nowadays is it's just so saturated. There's so many things out there with regards to like fitness and training, and as of with nutrition. But there's still lots and lots to learn, and things like food and the impact on gut health, for example. We know the importance of gut health nowadays, so it's finally gaining the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if I'm honest, I have an affinity towards the nutrition side of things myself. And I think, to be completely honest, when it comes to exercise, I think it's massively important. But at the same time, I feel when you look at the school system all the way down, it's like, if sport is your form of exercise, you're good to go. We don't need to really focus too much on training in the gym. Yes, towards later life, absolutely. But it's somewhat of a degree. You get a good foundation when it comes to the activity side of things. But when it comes to nutrition, you're left to your own devices from day one, essentially. And I hope and I imagine, I'm not so much in the school system that I know, but I'm sure there is educational stuff beginning to happen, and maybe that's something that you're looking to as well. But yeah, we're left completely to our own devices, and it can somewhat have a bigger impact than not exercising, because at some point most people at least are going to walk, right? But at the same time, no one has to eat vegetables or fruit on a day-to-day basis, but we do have to kind of move our legs if we want to get from A to B at some point, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, as they say, you can't outrun a bad diet, so yeah, it all starts with proper nutrition. And I always tell people, really pay attention to how food makes you feel on, mental, emotional, even physical sense. And once you actually are consistent with eating well, then it can really have a tremendous impact on your overall health and well-being.
For sure. And you just mentioned that you can't outrun a bad diet. So how important is nutrition when it comes to our fat loss and muscle building goals? Is it something that we can achieve without looking into nutrition? Or do you think that it's like the key puzzle piece? Without it, it does not work?
No, I mean, look, it's not only about nutrition. At the end of the day, there's a big buzz now with regards to, holistic health and holistic wellness, and that's exactly what it's about. It's everything's connected at the end of the day. It's not only about your nutrition, right? It's about your sleep, it's about your exercise, it's about, managing your stress levels, it's about your hydration. So all of that impacts your ability to achieve whatever goal that you have in mind. But of course, we do know, nutrition does have a link to all of them. We know what the role dehydration has on your food choices and decisions. We know, obviously, the impact and the relationship between your exercise and your nutrition. and for you to experience the gains that you want, nutrition plays a key role in that. But we also know the impact nutrition has on sleep. When it comes to eating well and eating enough calories, it can actually improve your ability to fall asleep quicker, to stay asleep, and overall improve your quantity and quality of sleep. And on the contrary, when you don't eat well or you don't eat enough, that can negatively impact your sleep. So at the end of the day, it's all connected. And obviously, we know the relationship between stress and food, but also stress and any other, kind of healthy lifestyle factor that we're looking at. So I wouldn't necessarily put it all down to nutrition, though I think it has a high impact on everything that I've just discussed. But I think people need to kind of look at it more from a holistic perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you mentioned there in terms of just before I asked that question, you said, how does food make you feel on an emotional level, on a psychological level, on a physical level? It's more than just the food that we put into our mouths and how it impacts our body composition. Like you said, it impacts just about everything in terms of our decision making and the way that we move about our day, and that all ties up together. And you've mentioned some key components of nutrition when I've heard you speak before. You've mentioned quantity, quality, and timing as being three super important foundations of nutrition. If you had to, and I know like any good nutrition professional, you're going to say they're just as important as the others, but would you put them in any specific order?
Look, first of quality. If I were to rank them, again, I don't think they can be ranked. But if I were to rank them, just for the sake of this conversation, quality for sure. If I always use the example of fuel and a car, right? And if you were to take a Ferrari and you were to put a low grade fuel quality into the Ferrari, then it's not going to be driving at the speed or power or even the distance that it can potentially be driving at. Whereas if you put high quality fuel into the Ferrari, then that's where you can really optimize its performance. So the same thing with regards to the human body and what you put in it, right? The human body is the Ferrari, and your fuel is what kind of food that you put into your body. And if you're continually putting good quality food in your body, and good quality calories and lean proteins and good carbs, healthy fats, fruits, vegetables, drinking enough water, then you'll feel great. You'll optimize your mental, physical, and better your emotional health as well. Whereas if you're continually eating junk food and sweets all the time and refined sugars and food, then you're not going to be working at the best of your abilities. You're not going to be improving your brain function. And we're not only talking about a sports perspective, right? We're talking about, day-to-day life, where your brain essentially uses glucose or sugar as fuel, right? And if you're not kind of giving your body good quality fuel, then things like your decision making, your problem solving abilities, your ability to think and think critically and solve problems, all of that is going to be impaired, So I'd say, quality. Look, time. I would rank timing from a sports nutrition perspective. I think timing plays an absolutely critical role. Understanding your training schedule, your training demands and intensity, and then being able to fuel and recover your muscles in the right time. That plays a huge role, right? Especially if you're doing competition or in days where you're training more than once. Your nutrient timing is absolutely critical. And then quantity, quantity is obviously really important as well. But if you were to talk from I guess the clinically healthy population or just the general population, quantity could potentially go second, and we know that these days we tend to overestimate how many calories we consume and underestimate how many calories we burn, and we tend to eat way more than we should. So, and portions, if you look at portion sizes from the 50s till today, they've doubled, if not tripled in size, and hence in calories. So I would say for kind of the non-athletes, then quantity would be second, and then timing would be third.
Yeah, so you absolutely, without a doubt, put quality at the very top, and I would have to agree with you there in the sense of performance and health, full stop. But when it comes to body composition, which most people are looking for, there's a lot of arguments to suggest that, of course, quality is important, but it's not absolutely fundamental in terms of losing body fat or increasing muscle, so to speak. And what do you say to those people who argue that maybe quantity is more important from this perspective? If I eat 1,200 calories, I stay within my calorie deficit, even if it's with the poor quality choices, I'm still going to be able to lose weight. What's your feedback to those type of people?
I completely disagree. I completely disagree. I mean, let's say you took 100 calories worth of M&Ms and you compared that with 100 calories worth of apples. Yes, they are the same calories, but you're not getting in the same type of calories, which definitely can impact your ability to lose weight. At the end of the day, calorie counting, and I'm saying calorie count just referring that to quantities because that's how people gauge how much they need to eat these days. Although I think there are other better, more sustainable ways to kind of measure quantities. But anyway, yeah, I mean. If you were to compare two foods with the same calories but different quality, you're obviously gonna better, just gain whatever it is that you're trying to achieve from good quality calories, and your body obviously responds well and digests better good quality calories, which hence can improve your overall body functions. But yeah, I mean, going back to the idea of calorie counting, it's not exact science because even if you were to take 100 calories worth of M&Ms versus 100 calories of apples, again, your body digests and absorbs these calories differently, and you can better utilize the calories digested from the apples as opposed to the M&Ms, which may just kind of end up being stored there as fat as opposed to actually being burned or metabolized. So I completely would disagree against that notion.
Yeah, once again, I agree. But at the same time, I do think that if you do put yourself into a low enough calorie deficit and you expend enough energy, you probably still can drop body weight, maybe the quality of your results in terms of the speed and also your health and everything along those lines are going to be impacted. But I think that people will still argue they can drop body weight or body fat whilst doing that. And that's the part I'm really curious to pick your brains on and get deep into, because if there will be a lot of people saying, yeah, 100 calories in M&Ms and apples are going to be completely different in the way they're digested and metabolized and utilized within the body. But at the same time, I am still consuming 100 calories. And as long as I keep my deficit low enough, then I'm still going to be able to lose weight. So that's where I'm curious to get an idea of what your response is to that.
Look, at the end of the day, I'll completely agree. That weight loss is all down to calories in versus calories out. That's what it is. Especially being in a calorie deficit, whereby you're burning more calories than you are consuming, right? But again, with weight loss, it's more than just being in a calorie deficit. You have to think about, first of all, what that deficit is going to look like, making sure it's not too extreme of a deficit where actually it can then backfire and hinder your ability to lose weight. You have to look at the quality of food as well. So going back to what I'm saying, if you're eating 100 calories of Snickers, you're going to be more often than not only impacting your blood sugar levels, but probably just storing the calories as fat in the body, unless you're kind of exercising, either right before or after you eat the 100 calories worth of M&Ms, where maybe it can then be used as fuel. And then at the end of the day, I mean, it's in terms of actually sustaining that weight loss, it will be more difficult to sustain weight loss even if you're in a calorie deficit by eating, but lower quality food, let's put it that way. And also, people need to keep in mind that if you're not, if you're consuming, sugary foods or salty foods or fatty foods, then that can actually increase fluid retention in the body. And so when it comes to actually the weight number on the scale, which many people fret about or, focus on, then actually the sugars and the fats can absorb water, which can actually kind of maintain your weight, if not increase it. Especially if you were to weigh in the day after kind of having like a cheat meal or a heavy junk type of meal. So that's another consideration too.
There are some fairly convincing arguments, and that's exactly what I was after. I wanted some clear, concrete reasons why in the long term, especially, it's probably not the best idea. I always like to think of it as like a high interest, quick loan. It's like something that you might get away with for a short period of time, but at some point you're gonna have to pay that back and with interest on top. And quite often the interest is probably going to be at the expense of your health as well, which is not something you want to be playing around with whatsoever. So I couldn't agree more from that perspective. And you did mention just then that there are more sustainable ways to utilize portion control and everything than tracking calories. What are some of those sustainable ways, and what do you recommend on your app, for example?
Yeah, a big part of what I used to focus on back when I, was working with hundreds of clients, but also kind of, a big part of what we do now as Kayam, the startup that I'm working on, is the idea of mindful eating. Mindful eating for me is a great way to eat, just as a lifestyle, as a way to help you make simple but correct food choices on a daily basis. So for those who are not really familiar with mindful eating, it's more of a process or a way of eating than it is something that's kind of results or outcome focused like dieting, which is predominantly meant for weight loss. So it's more of a way of eating, and it's more about being present and in the moment with when you're eating and paying attention to what, how, and even why you're eating. Going back to the idea of quantities, it's just about being mindful of your portions, of how much you put on your plate, even kind of the way you eat, not necessarily eating, out of different plates in front of you or out of the box, ideally portioning it on a plate where you can actually visualize the food and the quantity that you're eating. But also, you can actually portion control by simply being aware of your hunger levels before and after eating. And that's part of mindful eating as well, where, before eating, ideally you should be approaching your meal feeling hungry and not necessarily feeling starving. And so when you approach the table when you're hungry, you can actually not only make better food choices and decisions, but be able to control your portions better. Because let's say you were to start your meal starving, we've all been there before, you'll just eat anything and everything in front of you without being aware of how much you're eating, because you probably haven't eaten all day and you just want to stuff your face with food. But also it's about paying attention to how full you feel after eating as well. And as part of mindful eating, you want to be eating too satisfied, when you kind of feel somewhat neutral, as opposed to eating too stuffed or to the point where you start to feel bloated or just overly heavy and nauseous. And so by simply just being in tune and aware of how you feel, you can actually indirectly impact how much food you're eating. There is a hunger scale that we use out of 10 where people can actually, assess how they're feeling before and after eating, and by doing that, it can really help them, portion control, but also just paying attention to the types of food that you put into your body, actually pausing before you make a decision, thinking before you eat, understanding the quality of food, how it was cooked, what's in it, so that you can, again, make better food choices and not necessarily eat mindlessly. In terms of just how you eat as a general way to eat, but as a way to also kind of tie into portion control, we want to be eating slow. The slower we eat, the fuller we'll feel, and hence the less amount of calories or food you'll consume. Typically takes the brain 20 minutes to realize that it's full, so that is kind of an ideal time to finish a meal. Obviously chewing more as well, so that you can better digest your food and just feel lighter, but that also can contribute to eating slower. So there's so much with mindful eating. I mean, I can go on about it, but I'd say the more people are in tune with themselves and in tune with the way they feel, and just kind of develop that awareness, then they can start making the right choices on a daily basis.
Yeah, and in the fast-paced world that we live in and the city that you're currently in Dubai, where everyone's got 110 things to do and rushing from place to place, and someone who will say, well, I don't have time to mindfully sit down and have my meal, I can just squeeze something in between meetings. What type of practical solutions do you give to those people who have got all the excuses in the world and in some ways some legitimate reasons as well?
Yeah, look, I don't blame people, and I'm one who experiences this busy lifestyle. I guess the difference with me is I've been practicing this for so long that it's kind of it's part of who I am. It feels automatic now, which means that I have the right habits. But for those who are kind of still getting started, or in the early days of their journey, look, it needs constant repetition, like that developing that awareness, that the fact that you need to, whether you get on any delivery platform, or if you're kind of waiting in line to order some food at a cafe or a restaurant, just really putting some thought and effort into the choices that you're making, and that awareness needs to continually be strengthened. So I think it all starts in the mind at the end of the day. That's a big part of what I try to tell people to do. But another thing as well, as you start to make the right food choices, it's important to really understand how you're feeling, right? So and again, this kind of goes back to the awareness, but when you start to after eating a healthy meal, for example, pay attention to the way you feel, right? You'll most likely feel great, you'll feel satisfied, you won't have that kind of heavy feeling. Emotionally, you'll feel good because you haven't, like, I guess, quote unquote, cheated. But you'll also feel good because you're actually eating good quality food, and you won't get that kind of midday crash. You'll still feel focused and energized. And on the contrary, to also focus on how you feel when you don't eat a necessarily healthy meal, and how that impacts your overall well-being. And a lot of people, unfortunately, when they kind of mess up or fall off track, they start to feel guilty and frustrated, and that's obviously unpleasant emotions to experience. And then to use these feelings as a reminder the next time you kind of are faced in a situation where you're busy and you need to make a decision on the go, always remember how you feel, whether you ate well or even how you feel when you didn't eat well, and that can serve as a motivation for you to make the right choices on a daily basis. But yeah, and just understanding how, for those who live a busy lifestyle, again, working professionals, as I was mentioning earlier, eating the right types of foods has a significant impact on your ability to focus, on your productivity levels, and your energy levels to sustain meetings and Zoom calls and all of that stuff. So, buying into it, but also, just realizing how it makes you feel, I think can help people then start making the right choices and being consistent with it.
And a really important part of a choice when it comes to your nutrition is what you choose to eat on a day-to-day basis, and also how much you choose to consume in terms of certain macronutrients like carbs, for example. And I've heard you speak before about the difference between carb cycling and fuel for the work required, if I'm correct in saying that that's the term you usually use. Can you run that through that? I think that'd be really valuable for a lot of people to go through, because a lot of people either have the assumption that it's some form of carb cycling, they go high carb one day, low carb the next, or they just eat the same thing every day. Can you talk to us about the, I think, 4 different phases or days that you have in which you manipulate and adapt your nutrition based on what you've got going on that day?
Yeah, 100%. So this can actually go out to professional or recreational athletes, but it's something that I've learned from my practice and implement with your weekend warriors, or people who just exercise a couple of times a week or so, but also can help with things like weight loss as well. So carb cycling, the general notion of it, or what people understand of it these days is, as you said, one day you probably would eat high carb, the other day you'd eat low carb, and maybe some days no carb. With fuel for the work required, it's actually manipulating your carbohydrate intake, not only on a day-to-day basis, but even on a meal-to-meal basis as well, and connecting your carb intake with your training demands and intensity, so that you can really, as per the title suggests, fuel your muscles for the work that is required. So there is a scale, obviously. There's a rate of perceived exertion scale, which measures people's level of effort during their exercise. Anything from an 8 to 10 out of 10 would be like maximal effort. Anything between a 5 to 7 out of 10 would be, medium to high effort, and then anything from 1 to 4 out of 10 would be considered low effort. Hence, it would be considered as low intensity training. So people can use the scale, and they can obviously with time be able to understand their body more and understand how much effort they're actually exerting in the session. But they can use that to determine, how much carbs they need. So when you think about, let's say, someone who's trained at an 8 or higher out of 10 effort-wise, then that's considered to be high intensity for that individual. So, half the plate would be carbs, quarter would be protein, and the other quarter would be vegetables. If someone were to train, at a high effort, but not entirely as intense as an 8, for example, then that would be medium intensity. So you'd split your plates in thirds. So a third carbs, third protein, third vegetables. And then, if you're doing an easy session, didn't really break a sweat, didn't really put much effort, and you're anywhere between a 1 to 4, then that's a low intensity training. So, obviously in these days, you wouldn't need, if you anticipate such a session or you finished such a session, then you wouldn't need as much carbs, because you know that you're not going to be putting as much effort anyway, and it's not going to be as intense. So half the plate would actually be vegetables or salad, a quarter would be protein, and then a quarter would be carbs. And then obviously if you're on you're resting, then you don't really need energy per se, so you can get your carbs from like vegetables or salads. So you can portion your plate with half of protein and half of vegetables. That's kind of like a top level view. Now, of course, if people, in Dubai, for example, there's a huge community of triathletes and people who really take their training seriously, and these kind of people train 2-3 times a day. But even if you're not a triathlete and you're one who trains, let's say, twice a day, then you'd have to manipulate your carbs even on a day-to-day basis. Meal-to-meal basis. So, for example, if someone, a lot of people train, for example, on an empty stomach, train fasted, right? So actually your carbs would start the night before. So dinner would be a great time for you to actually fuel your muscles so that you can start that fasted session, having topped up your energy levels in the muscles. So, you can have, and let's say if it's a high intensity session, then you can have that high intensity plate, so like half carbs, quarter protein, quarter vegetables, right? And then if you train the next day on an empty stomach, you're depending, let's say if that was a high intensity training, just to continue off my example, then obviously you'd want to refuel accordingly. And because it was a high intensity training session, then you'd still follow that high intensity plate for breakfast, right? So now let's say that person trained in the morning, but doesn't have a training session in the evening. Well, then that lunch plate can actually be the low intensity plate, or even the rest day plate, because you're not training in the evening, right? And then again, dinner time comes, now let's say, getting off the same example, if someone actually had an evening session after the morning session, well then, depending on the intensity of that session, then that lunch may be a medium intensity plate or a low intensity plate or even a high intensity plate, depending on that evening session's intensity, if you know what it's going to be like. So then lunch, you'd eat accordingly, and then dinner, you'd also refuel accordingly as well, depending on that evening session. So it's really kind of thinking not only day to day, but meal to meal, and also thinking about your effort, thinking about the intensity of training, and then being able to work off backwards. Because at the end of the day, we do know that if you do consume a lot of carbs or excess carbs without burning, so if you're eating a high intensity plate, which is half carbs, on days where you're resting or days where you're training at a low intensity, well, that can then be stored with time as fat, which can hinder someone's ability to lose weight and fat. So it's really about being carb smart, is what I like to call it.
Yeah, I think there's some sound principles for people to follow there. And something that might come along, and a question I'm sure you get all the time, we even mentioned it in quotation marks earlier, is the quote-unquote cheat meal, right? So I'm sure a lot of people will be like, well, when can I fit that into my plan? Is it something I can do on the weekend? What is your recommendation, your standpoint on that?
Look, I think first and foremost, having a cheat meal, is necessary. I preach balanced eating. You know, I always tell people to follow the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're eating healthy, clean, unprocessed foods, and 20% of the time is where you need to be eating foods that you enjoy, foods that you crave. That's where the cheat meals can come in, right? But you know, keeping it at that 20% during the week, you know, not trying to go overboard. So I think people shouldn't feel guilty or ashamed that, you know, they're eating cheat meals. I think if anything, it will help. Um, you, Sometimes for me, I don't necessarily recommend people to do it on a weekly basis, because when you think about it, weekly basis is once per week, which is 4 times per month, and then over a year, that's quite a lot. Maybe to do it once every like 10 days or 2 weeks or so. But you know, even if you were to have your cheat meal, there are a couple of strategies that you can go about it. You know, first you mentioned, you know, someone wanting to have the cheat meal on the weekend. Well, you know, you don't have to necessarily have your cheat meal on the weekend. And actually, if someone were to have a cheat meal during the week, it does make their weekend healthier in a way, because typically weekends are where people mess up, and it's just filled with cheat meals. Whereas if you kind of satisfy that craving early on in the week or someday during the week, then the weekend you might not have that craving. And so it might be a healthier weekend than you were to experience, you know what I mean? But even if you were to have a cheat meal, you know, again, as part of balanced eating is to add some sort of healthy component to it. So let's say you were to eat a pizza or a burger with fries or fried chicken, sure. Well, maybe have a side salad, you know, or maybe have a salad as an appetizer. Add some greens to your meal, you know what I mean? Creating healthy swaps. Maybe you don't have to necessarily have fried fries. You can have like air fried fries or oven baked fries. So finding healthier alternatives to your cravings. You know, if you were to have desserts, maybe you can add a piece of fruit in there, like apple crumble, or you know, maybe even just have a fruit with some yogurt as dessert. Balance it out accordingly to kind of lessen the ease on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it all comes down to just, as you mentioned, the mindful and intuitive principles more so than anything. I'm even keen for people not to call them cheat meals, just call them meals, you know, meals that are not in line with your typical day-to-day plan. And it just takes the edge off of it a little bit, because I feel that once you set that premise of it being a cheat, it's like, okay, let me make the most out of this as possible. So I think if you can price, like you said, some simple principles around it, you still keep your portion control mindset front of mind as well. I think that you can get away with having it from time to time. Do you think it's still a good thing to do, even if you want your results coming pretty fast? Because I can imagine there's always this trade-off between, okay, it might help with endurance, but then it also might set us back in terms of speed of fat loss. So do you recommend it kind of all the time to everyone? Or would you say for some people who want quicker results, it might be worth pushing it for the time being?
Well, if we were to talk about quick results, then I would say, you know, yeah, that cheat meal can definitely impact, you know, the speed at which you achieve your results. Though I will kind of counter against that. And, you know, at the end of the day, I know people do want to see quick results, but actually having that short-term thinking, that kind of quick win, backfires in the long term. So I actually highly encourage people to have a long-term view of things, to have more of that growth mindset, where you need to kind of just be patient to be able to see long-term results. Because what ends up happening 9 out of 10 times is someone may lose 4, 5, 6 kilos in, you know, a few weeks to a month. But you know, I guarantee you that in a month or two time, not only would they have gained that weight back, but probably gained more weight than they lost. And you know, so I think it's important for people to start shifting their mindset to have more of a long-term view. Yes, it requires more time. Yes, it requires more effort, but it is the right way to do things. And it will allow you to actually sustain the weight loss, which many people struggle with, again, because they kind of follow these fad diets and focus on these short-term solutions that, you know, claim things that are too good to be true, and end up backfiring, you know. So sure, you can have the cheat meal. I think whatever your goal is, long-term, short-term, you know, that cheat meal maybe can help just from a psychological perspective. But I think it's important for people to shift their mentality and think long term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what I've seen a shift of, in fact, is a lot of people going from that short-term approach to the long-term. When clients approach me, I often have them saying, I want to get in shape for X, Y, and Z, but I want to maintain this for the next, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Whereas earlier in my career, it was, I want to get in shape for this event, full stop. And there was no real thought about thereafter. So I think it's a beautiful shift that's taking place. But as you mentioned, so many people do struggle with the long-term sustainability. So if you had to give 3 key principles, we won't even put it at 5, we'll put it like 3 key principles for those of your people who you work with who are able to maintain their weight loss results full stop long term, what would you say that they are?
Definitely. So first, something I already touched up on is mindful eating. Mindful eating is a way of eating. It's process oriented, it's behavior oriented, and when you start to gain more awareness and eat more mindfully, make better decisions, being able to portion control, being able to understand your hunger levels, being able to understand and control your emotions and not let your emotions out on food, which a lot of people suffer from, and which is a huge obstacle in the way for many people's weight loss journey, then it will allow you to actually sustain, eating well, and hence sustain, the weight loss over time. And there has been studies in the literature to suggest that, mindful eating can impact weight loss. And then number 2 is building the right habits. At the end of the day, habit and behavior change is what will allow people to, be able to eat well and make informed and correct decisions, which in turn can help with their ability to lose and maintain the weight and live a healthy lifestyle. It all comes down to habits, so again, habits do take time. They are not easy to change or replace. Habits are hard to break, but kind of goes back to that idea of the long-term thinking, where so long as you are just making simple changes to the way you eat and practicing simple habits one day at a time, not overcomplicating things, not focusing on too many habits at once. That's a key part of what we do, right? Is we don't only simplify the habit, but we literally focus on one habit at a time. I think a lot of people unfortunately try to do too much too quick these days, which makes them feel overwhelmed and go back to square one, and hence back to their old habits. And number 3, definitely, certainly not least, I'm a big advocate of again just focusing on the mind. That was actually, the purpose of my first book, which was called Fill Your Mind Before You Fill Your Plate, which is, basically telling people that whereas you may think that signing up to a gym or finding a personal trainer, signing up to a meal plan or going on a diet is your first point of contact when you want to actually achieve whatever goal you have in mind, it's actually focusing on your mind, right? Developing the right attitude, developing the right mindset, having a growth mindset, which again is, down to, among other things, having a long-term view on your goals. That will allow you to kind of be easy with yourself, accept kind of the situation, and not, itch for short-term results all the time. And that can help you actually make make you live a healthy lifestyle, right? What does a lifestyle mean? It means this is a part of who you are every day of every week of every month of every year, and being consistent with that. And to do that, you have to have the right mindset. Again, eating mindfully and building the right habits will allow you to achieve that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to mention your book as soon as you finished answering the question, because you mentioned mindfulness, you mentioned habits, and you mentioned mindset as well. And then the 2 other missing ones out of your book title was belief and sacrifice. Where do they come into it?
Yeah, so mindset is actually the first pillar. So the book is about, the 5 pillars of living a healthy lifestyle. And so the first pillar is mindset, which is kind of, I just touched up on it. Belief comes second. People, and this comes with, having a growth mindset, just to believe in yourself and believe in your abilities, believe in that you can actually achieve your goals, because your beliefs can shape your thoughts, which in turn shape your feelings and then your behaviors. And so, it definitely starts with how convinced and confident you are with achieving your goals. The 3rd pillar is mindfulness. Again, touching up on the idea of mindful eating, but, being mindful and aware of what's happening around you, your schedule, how you feel, your emotions, which all tie into your food choices and decisions. Sacrifice comes fourth, um, you know, and the pillars are kind of in sequential order because, without having the right mindset and believing in yourself and being mindful, then it can be hard to sacrifice. And unfortunately, for people, sacrifice is part and parcel of the journey. You do have to sacrifice small things to kind of get to where you want to be. And it can be simple things, right? You can go out with friends and family and eat at a restaurant. You can maybe eat what they eat, but maybe kind of do your own thing on the side and still, be on track while enjoying your time out with friends and family, right? Or let's say you're going to a friend's house, and you know that they always order unhealthy food, then maybe you can eat your dinner before you go to your friend's house, and that way you're enjoying your time with friends, but also you feel good about yourself because you've stayed on track. Maybe waking up a little bit earlier to hit the gym in the morning. So there's a little sacrifices on a day-to-day basis that you can do to get to where you are. And then above all, well, not really above all, but the fifth pillar is your habits, right? And so, all of these things will lead to you being able to replace bad habits with better ones and actually allow you to build better eating habits. And I can go on with talking about habits, but one thing people need to understand is that there's a term called brain or neuroplasticity. It means that the brain is plastic. We can rewire our brains to form new habits, similar to how we've wired our brain to go about our habits on a day-to-day basis. So thinking like washing your hands every time you use the toilet or brushing your teeth first thing in the morning, you've done this for such a long time, you've repeated these behaviors for such a long time and actions that they've become a habit. It's something that you do automatically without thinking, which is again another characteristic of a habit. So yeah, this approach is not what people like to hear because again they like that quick win, that short term and quick results, but it always kind of hunts them back, and that's why I think people are coming to a point, as you said, where they're finally realizing that they just want to eat healthy, feel healthy, and just sustain this kind of lifestyle.
That's it. It's coming back to that high interest loan again, and the thing where people just realize that I've gone through so many of these ups and downs in the years with my dieting, with my training, with the inconsistency. I just want something that sticks and works now. And then they end up at something that does fundamentally challenge their beliefs, their habits, and as you mentioned, their lifestyle as well. And they're like, this was the thing that I was resisting all this time, but the thing that truly I need. And then fortunately, they come to a point in which they then need to integrate it. And don't get me wrong, it's a little harder than saying for 6 weeks, I'm going to semi-starve myself and exercise every single day, because it's much longer than that. It's the next years of their life, but it's that kind of immediate pain for the long-term win versus being in the pain long-term to get in the quick win. So I think that you hit the nail on the head there, and I completely agree. And I want to transition now onto your digitization of your consultancy and you going fully into an app. There's a lot of people who are skeptical about the work that I do, which is online coaching. There's a lot of people skeptical about apps as well and the effectiveness of those. How effective really are apps when it comes to weight loss goals, body composition improvements, health improvements, full stop, and compared to maybe something a little bit more traditional like going to the gym or going to a weight loss community center or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, look, first in this digital world that we're living in, especially post-pandemic, the digitization of things has accelerated. So everyone has a phone, everyone's more on the go. I think the lifestyle we live nowadays, digital solutions are a great way to accommodate our lifestyle. People may have the time to go to physical centers, but more often than not, it's people want that easy access, that convenience, especially if you live in a place that has a lot of traffic. There are a lot of good apps out there. There's a lot of good apps out there for sure, and there has been some research to show the effectiveness of such apps. I mean, MyFitnessPal is one of them. Obviously, Noom is another one that's been showing to work. That's my aim with Kayam and what we're trying to do. But look, at the end of the day, I always tell people, if I don't care if you've downloaded the best app in the world, or you're working with the best nutritionist in the world. It all comes down to you. At the end of the day, it all comes down to you, your willingness, your drive, your commitment, your motivation, and your desire to actually want to create change in your life. And it starts with you. Again, if you have the best solution out there but you're not in it, then you're not going to benefit. You're right. So yeah, that's that. But with what I'm trying to do with Kayam, is provide that accountability from a human coach, and I think accountability in general is an important part of the process. I think a lot of people fail because they do things on their own, whereas if you have an accountability buddy, be it a professional or even a friend or a family, then it can make you more likely to achieve your goal. So I think apps out there that also provide that human coach on the other side, working with you side by side and guiding you, motivating you, then I think it can also be very important. And whether it's a digital or even a physical solution.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually doing a podcast. I released it this morning, in fact, and I was looking at the findings from the National Weight Control Registry, and they are a group that has the largest findings of weight loss. They've tracked people's weight loss from anywhere from 1 year all the way up to 66 years, and 55% of the successful participants all had some form of accountability in the form of a program, in the form of a trainer, in the form of a coach or something along those lines. So it does go to show the power of accountability, and not just on a short-term basis, and a long-term basis as well. So how is that provided exactly? If I download Kayam today, what type of accountability am I expecting?
Yeah, 100%. So, you'll get onboarded, we'll get to understand you better, we'll ask you some, questions about your lifestyle, your habits, and your goals. Accordingly, we'll then match you to a personal nutrition coach who's there with you by your side in the case that you need any support, advice, or recommendations, and you'll obviously get tailored and personalized support when and wherever you need it. And then you start tracking your meals through sharing photos of what you eat. Food tracking is a very powerful and insightful tool that can actually help you achieve your health goals, without having to even necessarily diet. I mean, food tracking in and of itself, first of all, increases your accountability by, just kind of seeing what you're eating. You can start to hold yourself accountable and start making changes. It can increase your mindfulness. It can help you develop the right habits. So that's why we focused on like photo sharing instead of calorie counting, to make it not only easy, but to kind of create this sustainable approach without having to focus on, adding and subtracting calories all day long, which again isn't very convenient. And then you can pick a list from our habits. We have our own unique habit building methodology that I've been tinkering with and proving out since I started my own practice. So we literally can help you break these habits into simpler ones, one step, and be able to track your progress over time and start changing your habits one step at a time. Just to give you an example, of how simple we do it, let's say someone doesn't eat any fruits at all, right? The first habit that we focus on is literally you eating one piece of fruit per day. Even though that's not the recommendation, that's kind of how we approach it, where we literally start with you from the ground up. Could be the same thing for water. If you're one who barely hits a liter, well, then we can focus on getting to that first liter and then get to where you need to be, like that 2 or 3 liter mark. And so it's an app that's revolved around tracking, and then we do pair you with a coach. As part of the free version, you can communicate with that coach once per day. It is a human coach who can monitor and see what you're doing and just provide you with that personalized support and recommendations. So kind of like getting advice easily and conveniently in your pocket, and that's kind of the whole purpose. We don't send out meal plans, we don't send out foods, we don't make people go on diets. It's about making the right choices on a daily basis, right? Without feeling judged or ashamed or guilty of what you eat, and just being smart, being mindful of and helping you build better eating habits, so that you can see long-term changes to your health and ultimately live a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, it sounds like a very, very interesting approach, and quite counter to the way that a lot of people are doing things as well. I had to ask, what's the best meal that anyone's ever sent that you've seen come through on the app?
They actually they take some nice photos, but this is the thing with tracking is when you start tracking your meals by photo sharing, and you know that there's someone looking at these photos, it automatically changes their habits, right? So we've seen some pretty good meals, but we do advocate, again, being honest and open with what you track and what you eat, because that will only help the coaches out. But we also want it to be a safe, non-judgmental environment where it's okay to eat these kind of foods. We've seen, I mean, the fried chickens. We've seen, obviously, there's a lot of like Arabic-based dishes. People eating their desserts. Those are always nice pictures. Um, but it's awesome to see that when they start to track, and they also can start tracking their emotions and hunger levels, and then for them to come and tell you how they're realizing, not only that they're realizing that they need to change the way they eat from just looking at the pictures, but by them simply tracking, things like the hunger levels and emotions, and them telling you how it makes them feel and how it actually motivates them to want to better their food because of this awareness that they're developing. It's amazing to see, and that's what we want to continually push out and spread with people.
Absolutely. And on that note, what impact do you want to leave on the health and wellness industry, personally and with Kayam?
Yeah, with Kayam, at the end of the day, the overarching drive or mission, as I mentioned, the obesity and diabetes epidemic has skyrocketed over the past decade in the Middle East and North Africa region. So, to be able to positively contribute to that, and be able to lower the rates and start, providing proper education and support, especially through habit and behavior change. That's that's the goal, and just to just positively impact and transform people's lives into healthier ones. From a personal drive, with Kayam, for me, by 2026, I want Kayam to be the leading and most used nutrition app in the region that helps people live a healthy lifestyle through habit and behavior change, and is top of mind for people who want to lose weight without dieting.
Perfect. I'm sure you're well on your way to that. And where's the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up with your work and the things you're doing with the app?
Yeah, definitely. So the app is called Kayam. It's Kayam, and you can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and the handle is kayam.app. We put out pretty educational content, valuable stuff for people to learn from.
Amazing. Faisal, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here today.
Likewise, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.